A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers, wherever you are around the world at this time. It is my delight to welcome you to another Let's Talk session. We trust that you are doing well, that you are in good health, and that you are ready to uh, experience another wonderful session of Let's Talk. Today we have as our special guest somebody who is not new to Let's Talk. We have Dr. Belle-Jarvis, and we are going to be together talking about caring for new life, the first 1,000 days. Before we go any further, however, we want to have a word of prayer, shall we? Eternal Father and our God, we thank you for the opportunity to discuss again a subject that is of great significance to many of us, and important that this information is conveyed in a meaningful way. We ask that you will be with our guests, that you will grant that the information shared will prove meaningful. Take full control of today's discussion in Jesus' name. Amen. So once again, friends, wherever you are around the Caribbean, around the world, we welcome you to Let's Talk. As indicated before, we are talking about caring for new life, and we are looking at the first 1,000 days. With me this afternoon, our special guest, we have Dr. Shivon Belle-Jarvis. She is the medical director of the Mount Sir Lester Bird Medical Center. I have to make sure I get that right now. The last time she was on Let's Talk, I believe she was the director of the pediatric department. Now she has been promoted. She is now the medical director of the main hospital in Antigua, Sir Lester Bird Medical Center. We are so delighted to have you with us this afternoon, Dr. Belle-Jarvis. Welcome to another Let's Talk.
Happy Sabbath, Dr. Greene. It's my privilege to be here. I'm so happy to always join you, and I'm greeting your listening and viewing audience. I believe that we will have a very fruitful discussion, and I'm hoping that change can take place once learning has taken place.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, Dr. Jarvis, we have a very important subject that we are discussing this afternoon. It is almost impossible to do justice to the subject in 60 minutes, but we're going to try. We are going to at least give exposure. So those who are listening, especially I hope those individuals who have young children and grandchildren. I know that grandparents delight in their grandchildren, and also individuals who are planning on getting children. I hope they're all listening. We want to include individuals who are in family ministries, individuals who are perhaps teachers, preschool, age daycare, daycare coordinators, etc. All those individuals should be able to benefit in significant ways from our discussion this afternoon. Now, I want to begin this way because when I listen to what is going on in the world, we live in a pandemic of NCDs. And some people may ask, what in the world does that have to do with our topic, caring for a new life? I want to think that many persons miss the important truth that the first few years of a child's life have significant impact on his or her health and well-being for years ahead. So can you begin by just expanding on that thought for us today?
Okay, so firstly, I want to comment on the whole issue of non-communicable diseases, and then I will transition into the importance of the first 1,000 days of life and the potential impact. So when we think about non-communicable diseases, so that we're very clear in terms of definition, we are speaking about those long-standing diseases that we are not able to pass from one person to another. These are long-standing diseases that are impacted by lifestyle, and we're thinking primarily when we hear about non-communicable diseases of hypertension, diabetes, epilepsy, or fits, cancers. These diseases have been raging the world by, like storm, if you may want to put it that way, because what we recognize, it really is a leading cause of morbidity and mortality the world over. when we think about non-communicable diseases, we previously thought only of the older population, but we recognize that non-communicable diseases also impact those of reproductive age and also impact our children. So where does this really tie in with the first 1,000 days of life or early life? We recognize that the first 1,000 days of life are very critical to development, not only in terms of one's milestones or what you're able to do, but primarily relating to brain development. So we recognize the need to protect, to stimulate, and to adequately nourish during those first 1,000 days. Now, by definition, the 1,000 days refer to that period from the time of conception to a child's second birthday. That is where you have most of your brain growth happening. That's where most of your connections are taking place. So we recognize that if we don't appropriately care for a child from conception to that second birthday, going up to the third birthday, it really means that they can be stunted not only in growth, but also cognitively. So how do we tie the two together? We recognize that non-communicable diseases negatively impact the mommy's outcome, meaning it increases her risk of not doing well in pregnancy and potentially dying. And it negatively impacts the growth and development of the newborn, which means that it can cause restrictions in growth and also challenges as the child develops. So I hope that this is very clear. I want to put one more plug as it relates to non-communicable diseases, because by the year 2030, we're going to see a 50% increase in the deaths that occur because of non-communicable diseases. And already we recognize that maternal deaths, so death in a mom who is pregnant or up to 6 weeks post-pregnancy, we recognize that 15% of deaths that occur in these women will occur because of having a non-communicable disease. And we can't forget obesity, because this is really the new pandemic.
Now, you have said quite a mouthful there, and I want to just make sure that I'm hearing you correctly, because what you said seems almost frightening. You're saying by the year, did you say 2050?
By 2030, we're going to
2030?
see an alarming 50% increase in our death rate across the globe because of non-communicable diseases. And as it relates to our women of reproductive age, or women who are actually pregnant, so maternal related deaths from pregnancy to 6 weeks after you deliver, we are already seeing that 15% of deaths in these women are because of non-communicable diseases.
That is really frightening. 2030 is not very far away. You know, I mean, this is 2025. We're talking about another 4.5 years.
Yes.
Wow.
And if we have been looking at it past the Greene, we recognize that we're seeing more and more persons dying. And we're also recognizing that we're seeing persons dying at a younger age. So it means, therefore, that we have to pay just a bit more attention to what's happening. There needs to be an increase in the personal responsibility for health, so that we can ensure that we're making appropriate decisions as it relates to our lifestyle.
Certainly. Now I want to skip back to this first question that I asked you about the connection between the first 1,000 years. Now, so you shared from the perspective of the parents, the mother. If the mother has a non-communicable disease, it can negatively impact the child, etc. And that is quite easy to understand. I wonder though, if if how we care for a child, what the child eats during that first 1,000 days, you know, if that can somehow precondition the child, or does it have any impact on when the child gets older, whether they'll be more susceptible or not? Can you speak to that for a little bit?
So excellent question. So when we look at the first 1,000 days, we recognize, when we said that this is the period where you have the most rapid brain growth and the neurons, or the connectivity within the brain, that is when you have the multiplication, almost like the branches of a tree. We recognize that the developing brain absorbs up to 50 to 75% of the nutrition that is offered during that time, from conception to the first 2 years of life. And so we recognize that if you have undernutrition for whatever reason, or even overnutrition, you can negatively impact growth. If you have understimulation or overstimulation, you can negatively impact development. Undernutrition, starting even from when mommy is pregnant, can result in a brain that is stunted, a child who is stunted as well. So we have to be very mindful as to the mother's nutrition. And we recognize that even the mother's nutrition impacts the amniotic fluid, or the fluid that surrounds the baby, to the point that the nutritional preferences of the mother will then become the nutritional preferences of the baby because of the whole taste, quote unquote, of the amniotic fluid. And more studies are being done on that aspect. But as it relates to what the child eats, we recognize that in the first 6 months of life, breast is best. So breast milk has been defined as a liquid gold because it has the appropriate amount of nutrients, it has the right amount of protection that is tailored to each baby. And so we recommend exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life. And then we say that you can add complementary foods or additional foods at 6 months of life, and you can continually breastfeed up to the age of 2 years and beyond. So we recognize that the choice of foods are very important as it relates to brain development, neuron expansion, and ultimate brain growth. And if we don't feed appropriately, we can have resulting cognitive stunting, i.e., a child, for example, who is not breastfed, has been found to not necessarily do as well in school as a child who has not been breastfed. It has been proven your IQ is definitely higher. I believe, Dr. Greene, based on how you operate, that you were a breastfed baby. At least I hope so. But yes, it has been proven that breast milk improves IQ. It reduces your risk of childhood illnesses, to include infectious diseases, diarrhea, ear infections. It reduces your rates of hospitalizations. It reduces the rates of chronic illnesses, so hypertension, diabetes, childhood cancer, obesity, and the list goes on. It's good for brain health, eye health, ear health. So breast milk has been found to be superior to any other nutrition in the first 6 months. And then we continue to breastfeed until the age of 2 years and beyond. So we have to be mindful. What I have noted a lot in going around the schools is that I'm seeing a lot of chubby box juice, sodas, sweet biscuits, the lack of fruits and water. So what we're recommending is that when a child is thirsty, that they drink water. For their snacks, they have fruits and or vegetables, 3 main meals, 2 snacks per day, and we're good to go. But what I'm seeing in the schools and what I'm seeing as I drive past the schools is very concerning, not only for our children in the short term, but also in the long term as well.
You are tempting me to ask a few questions, but I'm not going to yield. However, well, only for one now. This one, as you were speaking there, this came to my mind, and I wondered, breast milk is so important. And I have been hearing this a few years ago. We did a few Let's Talk sessions on the benefits of breast milk, etc. So it is a message that is going out there, but we're still getting so many mothers who prefer not to. Maybe there are some misunderstanding. There's some persons I hear saying, oh, they don't want their breast to become out of shape, and so they're not going to breastfeed, and those kinds of things. Can you just, for a moment, just speak to that?
Sure. So what we've noticed is that so we actually study this, right? Because I'm not sure if the listening audience is aware, but the Celestibed Medical Center is baby friendly and actually has been certified as a baby friendly hospital, which means that we promote exclusive breastfeeding. And so we actually study the numbers. We look at the number of babies who are able to establish breastfeeding within the first hour of life. We also look at the number of babies who are exclusively breastfeeding on discharge. And then we look at the number of babies who are exclusively breastfeeding up to 6 months of life. And what we recognize is that there are several factors that negatively impact why a mother chooses not to breastfeed. So when we look at the numbers, 98% of our mothers are able to, and this is outside of those babies that go to the NICU, those mothers that remain on the maternity ward, 98% of them are able to establish breastfeeding within the first hour of life. Of course, you'll have fluctuations. We can go as low as 92%, and in the last 3 months, we've been at about 88%. Because if a mother delivers via cesarean section, it is maybe a little bit different than if the mother delivers via vaginal delivery. And then when we look at the number or percentage of mothers who breastfeed at discharge, we're ranging just about 82 to 85%. But Dr. Greene, it becomes alarming where we are at 28 to 34% of mothers breastfeeding exclusively at 6 months. So we opted to do a focus group. What is happening? Why are you not breastfeeding? What are the implications? Well, the answers included the following. One, the breast milk doesn't last as long, meaning that the child always seems to be hungry and always seems to want to be on the breast. Two, grandparent interference. Oh, grandma say the breast milk too light, baby not getting enough. Thirdly, moms who have to go back to work. We recognize that the maternity leave, we primarily have 3 months at home. So on going back to work, mothers find the need to give additional or supplementary feed so as to prepare them for going back to work and the child getting accustomed to not being on the breast. Fourthly, as you would have mentioned, the change in breast architecture and structure is believed, although it's a myth, that mothers believe that their breasts will somehow be more long if they breastfeed for an extensive period of time. We do have medical reasons why mothers can't breastfeed. And so for those few medical indications, then these mothers will offer their child supplementary feeds. So those are really the issues that we have faced. We've tried to focus on educating not only the mothers, but also the fathers and the grandparents, because they have a significant role to play in supporting the mother. Sometimes as well, the mother has expressed that she feels overwhelmed, not much help in the home by the father. So because the formula is less easily digestible, so truth be told, it does last a little bit longer in terms of the hunger cues of the baby. So mommy would opt to give the formula so that she has a little bit more time to wash, cook, and clean while the baby sleeps. So yes, the breast architecture doesn't change. I mean, for my last baby, I breastfed up until the age of 3 years, and I have had no regrets to date.
So 28% is alarmingly low.
Yes,
That's a concern, really. I
yes,
did not expect it would have been that low, with
yes.
in light of all the education that has been given. But let me
Oh, the other thing, Dr. Green, I must say, the workplace is not thought to be breastfeeding friendly. So a lot of mothers also reported that most workplaces, which is true when you look at it, do not have a breastfeeding or breast milk expression room. They either have to go in their cars to express, or they have to go into the restroom, which is not considered to be a clean environment to express. And I usually challenge our listeners when I do talks like these to think about your workplace. Is there a breastfeeding room? Is that the woman has to lock up in her office just to express? And so because of that, it's almost the less that you use it, the less milk that you get. The more that you express or stimulate, the more milk that you get. So many mothers find that as they return to work, that their milk letdown or the amount of milk that they have available decreases. And scientifically, this is true because you're not really stimulating the brain to say, hey, I need more breast milk. Can you help me to produce?
but since we're talking about breast milk, let me go ahead and ask this question. It's about the quality of breast milk in terms of whether or not a parent whose diet is not adequate during pregnancy, can the diet impact the quality of breast milk? That's probably what I should have asked.
Okay, so culturally, that is something that we get very often. We have mothers who say, I haven't eaten anything, so I don't want to breastfeed, or I haven't eaten anything, so I'm not going to express. One of the things that we recognize about the body is that it always prioritizes for its most important need. So, for example, when a mother is pregnant, the baby is going to get all the necessary supplementation, even at the risk of the mother. And so too in breastfeeding, all the necessary supplementation is going to be made available so that the baby can benefit well. So we continually ask mothers, yes, we want you to be nutritionally sound, eating from all your food groups. We still encourage that the antenatal vitamins are continued even post-delivery. But even if you have not eaten breakfast, etc., still breastfeed, still express, because the body is going to opt to provide the necessary nutrients for the baby, even at the expense of anything else that is happening in mom's body. So to a baby in the body, as I was saying, a baby who is developing, what you'll find is that the baby will continue to get the necessary. And if it reaches to a point where the necessary does not exist, you'll find that the baby will put on less weight first, then the baby will lose height or length, and then only at the end will head size, which reflects brain growth, be affected, because at all costs, the body is going to preserve brain development. So that really is the last to go, and it's a similar phenomena as it relates to breast milk and breastfeeding.
Now, you partially answered my next question on two occasions, but I'm still going to ask it because there is some more that I'm sure you'd want to add to it. We're talking about caring for a new life. So, how do we define a new life? Some see a new life as taking place after birth. Others claim that, well, a new life begins at fertilization of the egg. So before we even talk about the conception of the child, can we talk about preparation and planning, and then you deal with when the life begins, or whatever order you want to do that.
Sure.
Because in a number of instances, pregnancy just happens. And so I really want to get at two things. When does the life begin? And why is it important to plan for pregnancy? And how does one do so?
Okay, so let's see which one we tackle first. Let's look at when does life begin? And really and truly, when we think about it, it is at the point of conception, right? When you have your nice fertilization taking place, because growth is basically, by definition, the increase in the number of cells or the increase in the size of cells. And so naturally, when the sperm and the egg come together and there's fertilization taking place, you have multiplication of cells and you also have growth of cells. Now, one of the things that we fail to recognize is that in the first few weeks of pregnancy, even before a mother recognizes that she's pregnant, where she's going to be having a positive pregnancy test, for example, or misses her period, the main organs of the body have already begun developing. The brain, the heart, the gut, okay? And so when we look at it, any potential injury that would occur will occur during that time frame that a woman does not recognize that she's pregnant. It therefore means that when you are planning for pregnancy, you have to always be in that state of preparation. Even if you don't plan, it means that your body should always be in that state of readiness. Because by time you recognize that you're pregnant, the development of the main organs has already started taking place. Therefore, what we found is that women, because they're not preparing, may not have enough folic acid on board, which is very important for brain and spine development. They may be exposed to things like alcohol and smoking, which have a negative impact on the main organs developing as well as growth. And then we recognize that even certain medications that are taken, which are safe outside of pregnancy, can have a negative impact on the developing baby. And so it therefore means that we recommend strongly preconceptional preparation or preparation before pregnancy, at least 3 months before. Now, why is this important? One, it enables you to do a health assessment. What are the chronic illnesses I have, if any? When we say chronic, we're speaking about, do I have diabetes? Do I have hypertension? Do I have epilepsy? Do I have cancer? Do I have asthma, etc.? Then it helps us to see, are these illnesses under control? If not, how do I get them into control? It helps me also with risk reduction, because I know that we have persons online who may either be exposed to drinking or smoking. So risk reduction means that I'm going to stop drinking, I'm going to stop smoking, I'm going to also reduce any potential exposure that can put me and the baby potential baby at risk. And then it also enables, as we said, control and identification of illnesses that may exist, as well as weight control. So that's one of the things that we often underestimate. Am I at the appropriate weight for my height as I prepare for pregnancy? The reason why this is important is that we recognize that non-communicable diseases do contribute to increased rates of miscarriages, increased rates of stillbirths, increased rates of maternal poor outcomes, as well as growth restrictions in babies, as well as prematurity. So it's important for the mother to plan at least 3 months before pregnancy. What is my weight? Am I at the most healthy weight? Do I have chronic illnesses? Are they under control? Do I have anything that is communicable as well that I need to address? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. The medications that I am on, are they compatible with pregnancy, or do I need to have them changed? And then what supplementation do I need? And as we said, every pregnant woman should be on folic acid, 0.4 milligrams. You don't have to remember the dose, but folic acid is a must as you prepare for pregnancy, and even your antenatal vitamins.
Now you said so much there. I was tempted to stop you because I wanted you to highlight this matter of an individual by the time they recognize that they're pregnant, the organs, the main organs would have already begun development.
Yes.
So that is in my mind very significant. So here is a couple, here's a married couple. They may be thinking about having a baby or maybe not thinking about having a baby. And then the woman misses her period and says, let me go and do a pregnancy test, and discovers, hey, I'm pregnant. And you're saying by that time, within that space of that month that she misses her period, the organs have already begun to develop. Am I hearing you correctly?
You are hearing me correctly, which is why it's so important that we don't only focus on the positive pregnancy tests. It's so important for us to plan pregnancy so that we can, again, always have our bodies in a state of readiness so that our baby can have the best potential ever. So that best potential, again, does not start after the baby is born, but rather from the time that you have that egg and sperm coming together and moving forward, then you recognize that organ development starts taking place. And so what we have sometimes is women saying, I didn't realize I was pregnant, I might have still been drinking, I might have still been smoking. What I've noticed in our women here in Antigua and Barbuda, that we still have women who, because they believe that marijuana is something that is natural, that they continue to smoke marijuana throughout the entire pregnancy. And this is something that we are yet to formally study, but anecdotally, what we've noticed is that some of these babies are actually born smaller than their counterparts, i.e., babies who are born to mothers with no chronic illness or mothers who are not smoking, right? And we have also had babies, we know of what we call fetal alcohol syndrome, where a baby is negatively impacted by alcohol, which changes the physical features, but also changes the developmental outcomes and results in the baby being developmentally slow for age. So it is not something that is just assumed, it's something that has been proven that non-communicable diseases, substance misuse, and other things that are thought to be toxic to the developing baby negatively impact not only after delivery, but from the time that conception takes place. So I can't overemphasize, Dr. Greene, the importance of preconceptional counseling, preconceptional preparation. Not to prolong the point, but from even a genetic perspective, we recognize that the genes are the building blocks that are responsible for how we look, and it's the reason why families look like each other. We recognize that the impact of substance on our genes while we're developing is significant. And so we do have some genetic disorders that result from substance misuse in pregnancy, even from the use of medications that are thought to be good outside of pregnancy, but are toxic while pregnant. And one of the common disorders, epilepsy or fits, many of the medications used for epilepsy have to be adjusted once a woman recognizes that she's pregnant.
Now, Dr. Belle-Jarvis, I think we're going to have to have a part two because I'm seeing that we are there's so much that you're saying. I think this is so
Yes,
much very useful information, and I think every woman, whether married or not, or pregnant or not, needs to hear this, and the men too, because they're going to fulfill the role of fathers, and so let me address this issue because I'm going back to the fact that there is this need for proper planning, in terms
yes,
of, and you said a good yardstick is 3 months before.
that's correct.
But I don't know if you have statistics at
Mm-hmm,
at Sir Lester Bird or whether you are permitted to share those statistics or not.
mm-hmm,
But I am concerned that there are a number of individuals who are getting pregnant, who are not married, who are teenagers, who
mm-hmm,
really did not plan to get pregnant. They went to Carnival and they met their
mm-hmm,
boyfriend and they did something and they end up being pregnant. Um,
mm-hmm.
is Am I unduly concerned? Is this a challenge in Antigua? Do we have a situation where there are a significant number of younger people, teenagers, etc., unmarried people who are getting pregnant and may not have had this notion of, I want to get a child, I'm going to plan to have a child.
Sure.
Accidental pregnancies, you may want to call them.
Sure. So we do capture whether you have a planned or unplanned pregnancy. I don't think we have formally studied planned versus unplanned, but we definitely do capture the teenage pregnancy rates. What I must say to you, however, instead of for me focusing per se on that, I want to hit home on something else that is significant because even when a pregnancy is planned, Dr. Greene, the challenge that we're having is that even after mothers would have known that they are pregnant, they're not seeking care. And so that for me is even a bigger problem than whether you planned or didn't plan, because once you know, you should seek care. And so here in Antigua and Barbuda, what we found is that 35 to 40% of our women who are presenting either have had no antenatal care or inadequate antenatal care. And by inadequate, we mean less than 8 visits throughout your pregnancy. 8, Dr. Greene, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Not a lot. And by the way, those 8 visits are if you have an uncomplicated pregnancy. It therefore means that if you have hypertension, diabetes, asthma, kidney disease, anything along that line, you require more than 8 visits. And I'm saying to you that 30 to 40% of our women here in Antigua and Barbuda have either not seen the doctor while they're pregnant or have seen the doctor less than 8 times, which is the World Health Organization recommendation as being ideal for you to pick up the necessary and control that which is needed. So it's a problem because we have women who just show up at the time of delivery, who, when you assess them, they have infections, they have high blood pressure, they have high blood sugar, their baby's growth is restricted or the baby's not growing well. So we're saying and appealing to our mothers, you might not have planned it, you might not have recognized it, but once you do recognize that you're pregnant, it is of paramount importance that you seek medical attention. Now, of course, once we study these numbers, we ask, but why aren't you seeking care? The response is as follows. Well, this is not my first pregnancy, so I already know what to do. I have to work. I have no time to go to the doctor. I have no money to go to the doctor, although we recognize that healthcare in the community and at the hospital is free for the most parts. So as a pregnant woman, you can present to your community clinic and be seen by your midwife and guided throughout the pregnancy. If your pregnancy is deemed to be high risk, then you'll be referred to the high risk clinic at the hospital. I know the response that we've commonly heard, I don't want people in the community to know my business, and so I'm not going to the community clinic. But what they don't recognize is that they're putting themselves and the baby at risk for negative outcomes. And so it's very crucial. You might not have planned it, but once you're aware, please seek medical attention. The other thing, Dr. Greene, is that when a woman is pregnant, and by the way, when you do marriage counseling, as you prepare, ideally, the counselor should ensure that both parties do their HIV testing, their sickle cell testing, their syphilis testing, and their hepatitis testing. Very important, primarily hepatitis B, to be exact. HIV testing, syphilis testing, sickle cell disease testing, hepatitis B testing, and even your blood group. Now, one of the things that we recognize is that in pregnancy, those are the same tests that we're going to be offering because they can have significant impact on the baby's development. What we have found, and we formally studied this in 2023, where we looked at how many mothers and fathers actually know their sickle cell status. And Dr. Greene, I'm not going to ask if you know yours. And here's the alarming result. 82% of mothers knew whether they had sickle cell disease or not, and they only knew it because they would have done the test in pregnancy. 82%. Do you want to hear the number of fathers?
Of course.
Only 3%
Wow.
of fathers. You see why I love to share statistics because it's so awesome and it's showing what's happening in country. This was a study done in 2023, right? At the Celeste Medical Center. Only 3% of fathers knew their sickle cell disease status. So it means then that when we test the baby, because we do what is called universal screening for sickle cell disease in our babies, and we say to a mother, your baby is a carrier for sickle cell or has sickle cell trait, or your baby has full-blown sickle cell disease, when we bring the father in, nothing talgo so come in and have it. And then when we test the father, he is also a carrier. So it means then that the focus cannot be only on the mother when we're having a child who is expected, but the father is also important in terms of knowing his numbers, knowing his labs.
Well,
So it's a mouthful, it's a lot, but it's important for us to get that. Antenatal care is important, at least 8 visits for an uncomplicated pregnancy. Having your blood results is important, and I mentioned the ones that are needed. And by the way, the blood tests that we do are in the first trimester or the first part of pregnancy, and the third trimester or the last part of pregnancy. And I'll pause here, but we can mention why this is important.
Now, it may please you to know that anybody who chooses to have me do the premarital counseling have to visit the doctor, and it's not a choice. They know that I say I don't care whether you're a virgin or not or that kind of thing. I'm not going to believe any of that. You are going to go to the doctor, you're going to get your medical checks done because you are getting married and you have a right, your spouse has a right to know what your status is. And so, that for me is non-negotiable. Now, let me follow up with this question. Is there such a thing as an ideal age for a woman to have children? What challenges are associated with being too young or being too old for pregnancy?
Okay, great. So I'm going to answer this from the scientific way or mechanism, and I'm going to answer it from the church's perspective. So when we look at reproductive age by definition is from the age of 15 years. And by the way, I'm saying reproductive age, the age at which we're looking at a female potentially having a child, although we've had younger adolescents being pregnant. But reproductive age by definition is 15 years to 49 years. When we look at what is defined as ideal, the ideal age for pregnancy is basically your mid to late 20s up to your mid 30s. So we're looking at anywhere from 25 to 35. We recognize that in your mid to late 20s, that is the period where you tend to be most fertile. Once you've reached the age of 35, so if you're over 35 years, you're considered to be of advanced maternal age. We recognize that different to the male, where we have sperm production daily, as it relates to the female, we basically have our eggs from before birth until we die. And every day the eggs get older. So once you pass the age of 35, it has been recognized that there is an increased risk of error as your genetic material multiplies when fertilization is taking place. It therefore means that over the age of 35, there's an increased risk of genetic abnormalities or babies who have genetic concerns. We've also noticed that mothers over the age of 35 have increased risks of the mother not doing well in pregnancy, having what we call comorbidities, so hypertension, diabetes. The rates of prematurity, miscarriage, and stillbirth also increase. Under the age of, well, in a less than 20 years, so in your adolescent age group, we recognize that the younger that you get below the age of 20, the less ready your body is for delivery. And so we recognize that our teenage mothers are at risk of hypertensive disorders in pregnancy. I'm sure we would have heard of the term preeclampsia. So high blood pressures in pregnancy, where it also impacts the kidneys, etc. They're also at risk of having seizures along with the high blood pressure. So we move on from preeclampsia to eclampsia. They also have a risk of having babies who have abnormalities as well. They're also at increased risk of infections in pregnancy, and likewise having babies who are born with no life, so stillbirths, as well as having miscarriages as well. So we almost see that on the extremes of age, the risk factors are quite similar, as likewise the outcomes. Now, here in Antigua and Barbuda, I can speak to my experience. From what I can recall over the past maybe 15 years, the youngest mother that I've seen it has been 12 years. I have been previously exposed to a 9-year-old, but not necessarily in Antigua and Barbuda. But the youngest mother that I've had, based on my recollection, is 12 years old. And we see the challenges, not being emotionally ready, not being in a position to have the necessary support, being at increased risk of mental implications, postpartum depression, the whole issue of the route of delivery, meaning vaginal delivery versus cesarean section, because you can imagine that the pelvis and the maturity there is not as advanced as it should be. So we have quite a few who end up with cesarean section. Coping with the pain level as a 12-year-old, you can imagine a child hits the finger or squeezed in the door. You see how they cry significantly. The pain of childbirth is very significant. And so pain thresholds at that age group, that is another discussion altogether. And so it really does take a toll. And so ideal age, as we said, mid to late 20s up to mid 30s, advanced maternal age, above 35 years old. And as we said, we're not encouraging teenage pregnancies. Within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we are recommending that you consider starting your family only after you're married. And that is the context within which family rearing should take place.
Dr. Jarvis, Belle-Jarvis, we have been exposed to a number of very significant matters here. Let me go to a question or two that some persons have asked, because our time is almost gone, and
we'll have to have the part two, because what the other parts of the discussion, I don't think we need to rush through it, but we recognize that there is a lot to grasp here, and we want to make sure that persons grasp the information.
correct.
So we don't want to rush through, but you can ask the questions as you desire.
So someone is asking, when we were discussing breast milk and breastfeeding just now, that they're making the point that some mothers claim that the baby refuses the breast milk, and they want to know if that can change. I suppose, what do you do to get your child to take the breast as opposed to the formula?
Okay, so we noticed that there can be breastfeeding difficulties, and that is why it is also recommended that you also have a lactation consultant who is able to assist. So challenges that are associated with breastfeeding: one, sometimes we notice that the mother's nipple is quite big, and so the baby may have a hard time latching. Sometimes mothers as well have sore nipples, and that is because, again, of poor latching. Because breastfeeding is not supposed to hurt at the level of the breasts. It will hurt in the lower aspect of the tummy or abdomen because the uterus is basically trying to contract down to its pre-pregnancy state. But outside of that, it's not supposed to hurt. But as it relates to babies who are, or some mothers, I should say, have a flat nipple. So again, the baby is not able to latch well. So what we recommend is this. Improving breastfeeding rates have been found by doing the following. One, skin to skin, and that is that skin to skin contact immediately after birth. That increases your rates of breastfeeding into the 90s in terms of percentage, right? So skin to skin is another thing that we track at the hospital. The next thing is establishing breastfeeding in the first hour of life. Once you do that, the rates of exclusive breastfeeding also increase. If you have challenges with the nipple, so a flat nipple, we have different ways that we can pull the nipple out or express breast milk. So by giving expressed breast milk, then the baby should then also be comfortable in taking the milk, whether it be by syringe or by cup. Another challenge, Pastor Greene, is the whole issue of nipple confusion. So one of the things that turns the baby off is when we actually give breast milk through the bottle. And by the bottle, I'm talking about the nipple bottle. Because what happens is the shape and texture of that nipple, as well as the amount of work that the baby has to do, is different compared to the shape, texture of the mother's breasts. So we have what is called nipple confusion. So we offer the baby breast milk through the nipple bottle, and it therefore results in the baby saying, wait, I can get this easily using that bottle. Why do I want the breast? So when they go to the breast, they pop off because what? They want you to give them the nipple. The other thing is pacifiers. Now, we love pacifiers as women because it helps the baby to suck, suck, suck and not cry and cause a disturbance. But the pacifier also causes nipple confusion. And so sometimes it's not really that the baby doesn't want the breast milk, but we have these challenges creeping in, which are a deterrent to breast milk. The other thing is when you're putting the baby to the breast, this whole issue of holding the baby's head from the back and forcing it onto the breast, the baby is naturally going to push back because, again, that is a deterrent to breastfeeding. So the short answer is one, having the appropriate guidance as to how breastfeeding should take place will help to improve the successful rates of breastfeeding. Breastfeeding at night is also important because any mother who I see who recently delivered, who looks very fresh and brighter than me, I know that she's not breastfeeding at night and something is wrong, right? So breastfeeding at night increases your success rate of breastfeeding. And we have to avoid the use of those items that will cause nipple confusion. So nipples, pacifiers, soothers, teats, any of those things are not allowed in a breastfeeding friendly hospital or baby friendly hospital, and likewise they should not be allowed in the home. But I'll leave that there for now because that causes a lot of contention, the use of the nipple and the use of pacifiers.
Now, again, very useful information. I noted that you said that mothers, young mothers or new mothers, well, I don't want to confuse the terms, the new mothers, but you are referring to lactation consultants.
Yes.
Um, I can hear some person saying, I don't want anybody to tell me how to feed my baby. You do have some of these pushbacks sometimes, but
Mhm.
I think what you're sharing is so very important because you already establish the benefits of breastfeeding. And if we consider that we are positioning our children, or when we refuse to give them the breast milk, we are robbing them of the ability to fight certain diseases, to become the best person that they can become. So very useful information. Now, there was another question about whether we're going to touch postpartum depression, but I think we will leave that until we get after the birth. I want to first
Sure, but I can just plug it quickly. Yes, we do
sure.
address postpartum depression. And one of the ways that we have actually changed over the years is that when a mom brings her baby back for review, so previously postpartum depression screening was sort of limited to the obstetrician. But now when they come to us as pediatricians, we actually screen the mother at each visit for postpartum depression, and we can talk about that the next time.
All right. So here's my next question. I want to go back to the pre-birth period, that 9 month. What do we need to know specifically in terms of care, and how does the emotional health of the mother impact the development of the baby? The baby's in the womb. What do we need to know with respect to care at that time?
Sure. So we spoke about the importance of having adequate nutrition, of taking our folic acid and antenatal vitamins, of drinking appropriate levels of water. We spoke about having at least your 8 antenatal visits to ensure that we're able to appropriately monitor both mommy and baby, and that we're able to pick things up early. Because what we've noticed as well is that we're having babies who are born with concerning findings that had we picked them up in pregnancy, we would have been able to transfer mommy and baby to a specialized center to deal with that primary area of concern. We also recognize in terms of nutrition, please note you're not eating for 2 and 3. Okay, you're eating for 1, which is you. And you're hoping that in eating appropriately, that you're also appropriately supplementing your baby. I spoke to the fact of the baby's nutritional preferences being affected by the moms. It's important to note that because sometimes parents will say to me, the child not eat no vegetables and no fruits. I said, do you eat vegetables and fruits? The answer is no. Okay. So even from within the womb, the taste buds, it is thought, of the baby are actually impacted based on the maternal choices. The other thing that we have to note is the impact of obesity and the risk that it puts to the unborn baby. Mothers who are obese are at increased risk of having gestational diabetes, and this negatively impacts the baby. These babies get additional sugars, which results in their pancreas, the organ that produces insulin, being much bigger. And these babies tend to be big. They have very full cheeks, they have very full neck. They're also very heavy, often the 9-pounders and 10-pounders that we see. But when they're born and separated from mommy with that high blood sugar level, they're no longer getting that, so their blood sugar drops. So we know that when these babies are born, we have to monitor their blood sugars because we don't want to miss a low blood sugar or hypoglycemia. Now, mental health. Mothers, it's very important for us to be calm, cool, and collective during pregnancy, because it has been found that mothers who are stressed during pregnancy produce increased amounts of stress hormones, which negatively impact the baby, can result in restricted growth, and can also result in babies who have behavioral challenges as they grow. And the lobby is still there as to whether or not they also increased mental health illnesses as they grow, to include anxiety and depression. So the pregnant woman, this is not the period for you to be stressed consistently. And it does happen because we do have separation during pregnancy. We have loss of jobs during pregnancy. We have children who have left the home during pregnancy. So many negative things in this world that can happen during pregnancy that result in stress. But we need to try to reduce the stress because of the impacts of the stress hormone on the unborn child and in the long term in terms of their mental health and well-being.
But the two areas that I want to touch before we wrap up this afternoon. One has to do with something you just mentioned. Well, both of them actually. Um, Sometimes a mother may report that they have a rough first trimester. They're not keeping down anything, they can't eat well, they're vomiting, etc. And so I'm really referring to the significant point you made there about the dietal preferences of the mother can affect the dietal preferences of the baby. So when you have a situation where a mother is not able to keep down her food and she has no appetite, or maybe she does have appetite in that first trimester, but she's vomiting constantly, how do you deal with that?
So basically, when we have a mother who is consistently vomiting, what we refer to as hyperemesis gravidarum. So emesis refers to vomiting, gravid, pregnant. Basically, there are different medications that can be utilized to help to control the degree of vomiting so that appropriate supplementation or nutrition can take place, especially in terms of fluids. Now, if the mother isn't keeping anything down, we recognize that there's really not much to stimulate or impact the baby in terms of preference, in terms of nutrition. But what we're speaking to more so is the negative impact where we feel as though the mother has to have KFC at night, the mother has to have pizza at night, you know what I mean? Where we are not having an appropriate or healthy diet. That is the concerning part where we're negatively impacting the preferences as the baby is exposed in the womb or in utero and then is subsequently born. But hyperemesis gravidarum, some women still, despite of medications being administered or offered, don't do as well, but some will get better as the pregnancy progresses. Some actually have to be admitted to get IV fluids, intravenous fluids or fluids through the vein to help to keep them hydrated and appropriately supplemented.
So the other question, I mean, I think you have made reference to it 2 or 3 times, and that is the impact of obesity. And because I know that obesity is a challenge in the Western Hemisphere, there is so much. Nearly every week, there is another bit of statistics to talk about the challenges of obesity. And all of this impacts on the national health system. And I suppose you, for example, in your position, have to be concerned because when we have ill health in the population, the burden that places on the government's health system is enormous. And we have I'm seeing these days little children. I read something the other day that talks about the the rate of obesity of children. Um, you know, I a few years ago I heard a news article where I don't remember the nation, but they had passed a law to say that they're going to hold parents accountable for obese children, and they were actually going to charge them. I thought that was very interesting. But here you have individuals becoming pregnant and they're obese. I know you mentioned it, but it to me is so significant. I'm going to ask you to address it one more time because I think more and more we're seeing this happening where people are either overweight or downright obese. They want to have a child, they get married, they get pregnant, and then there's so many complications.
Sure. So we spoke about the risk of obesity as it relates to the mother's risk of gestational diabetes and even hypertension in pregnancy. We spoke about the whole issue of the baby being at risk because, again, the baby is now exposed in a mother who has gestational diabetes to increased amounts of sugar. And basically, it results in the baby just growing at an astronomical rate. We also recognize that high blood sugar in pregnancy is very toxic to developing cells. And so sometimes these mothers are at risk of even stillbirths and even miscarriages as well. It also affects the main organs in the heart. So you can have heart disease as well in the unborn child to a baby who is born to a mother who has diabetes, for example. But I want to touch on childhood obesity because, again, I said that this is then basically the next pandemic. We already know that 1 in 3 of our children is overweight or obese, 1 in 3. And we say, oh, they'll go into their weight, or oh, they're big boned, or we like to see the babies with the cheeks and we go chooky, chooky, choo. But we recognize that obesity negatively impacts a child from head to toe. And I'll go through very quickly because I see the time. Depression, increased rates of depression, increased rates of increased pressures in the head. So they basically have almost as though they had migraines, but not really that. They have significant headaches. Sometimes they can have blurred vision. They actually snore, right? They have what we call obstructive sleep apnea. So while they're sleeping, it seems that their breath is going to cut off. They're at risk of heart disease, diabetes, fatty liver, gallstones, bowed legs, knee pain, flat feet, and the list can go on and on. And these are the risk factors for our children with diabetes as they grow older. They're also at risk of premature death. So we realize now that our children will not reach the potential of what their parents would have reached simply because they are obese and it impacts every organ of the body.
Wow, that is interesting. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, for the last 50 something minutes, we're talking about pregnancy, the first 1 1,000 days. We haven't spoken a lot about the after birth issues. We're gonna have part two. We will talk about that in a little bit. We're wrapping up now, but it seems almost that everything we have said relates to the mother. And I kind of wonder, where does the father fit in all of this, you know?
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
it's
The father has a significant role to play. There's a lot of study now going on as to the father's age. Is there an age that puts the father at risk, just like how we said advanced maternal age? So that still is out on the table. Recognize that the father is contributing, right? So we have the egg and we have the sperm. So we recognize that as it relates to genetics, the father does contribute as well in terms of risk factors for genetic disease and lifelong illness. We also recognize that the father has a role to play in terms of supporting mom throughout pregnancy, going with her to the visits to ensure he knows what is happening, being that support and not a stressor. Gentlemen, do not stress our ladies during the pregnancy because we already spoke to the impact of stress and the stress hormones on the mother and on the developing child. And even as it relates to feeding, the father can assist because mom can express breast milk and dad can assist in feeding the baby. But we recognize as well that dad has a significant role to play in terms of the nutritional choices that are made. And we recognize that also the whole impact of emotional support, spiritual support is crucial, which is the father's role as the priest of the home. And we can leave it there, but there's so much more to talk about with the father.
Yes, our time is up. We have to stop here. I want to say to our viewers, we are going to have part two, just so that you may know, in another few weeks or so. We already have scheduled for the next 2 weeks lined up, so it will have to come after that. But hopefully sometime in June, we will have part two. Next week, we are going to be talking again about health, but another area. We're going to be looking at the eye next week, and we're going to be having Dr. Quintero with us next week, and she is going to be presenting on the eye and important matters. We probably will be discussing glaucoma, what it is, you know. So join us next week for that discussion, and we will be announcing when we will have part two of this very significant discussion. Half the things I wanted to ask you, Dr. Belle-Jarvis, I haven't I haven't touched as yet. So we have a lot to say, but I want to express gratitude for the wealth of information that you have given to us. I have learned, and I'm sure that those who were online listening have also benefited tremendously. I'm thinking that you know, if I had a daughter who was well, I do have an adopted daughter. She's married, so I'm going to have to send this link to her so she can listen very well. Um, because this is really very important information for all mothers and fathers, and as I said, grandmothers and the like. But thank you so much. I'm going to give you the opportunity to just to leave what you consider to be one or two very important pointers that you want our listeners to walk away with this afternoon.
Okay, so we recognize that there is a personal responsibility for health. But one of the things that we do know is that our children are dependent upon us to make the right choices for them. It therefore means that even before they start developing, we can take the opportunity to give them the best potential ever by seeking preconceptional care. So before you consider being pregnant, at least 3 months before, get the necessary done, get your checks done with your partner to ensure that you're in the best position to offer your child optimal health. And then once you're pregnant, ensure that you have at least 8 visits with your healthcare provider. Eat well, exercise as is guided by your health practitioner. Drink lots of fluids. Remember that you're eating for you alone and not for two. And recognize that stress must be reduced through emotional support and even through prayer, so that again, our children can have the best possible outcome. Don't rob them of this because they are depending upon us. Because at this point, they really can't choose it themselves. Thank you so much, and I look forward to part two with you.
Amen. Thank you so much. God bless you. Friends, listening, audience, and viewers, we will be back here next week with another very intriguing discussion on Let's Talk. Until then, may God bless you.